Welcome to Direct Supply's Continuing Education webinar series. Direct Supply offers monthly webinars on a variety of topics throughout the year. The topic for today is Dietary EP Concepts and CMS's National Emergency Preparedness. My name is Robin Malik, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary, depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. Today's webinar will be presented by Ray Miller. Ray was the Director of Risk and Safety Solutions for Direct Supply. He has guided the development and implementation of resident and employee safety, risk management, and loss prevention programs. Ray has led the Direct Supply Loss Prevention Forum, a network of risk and safety professionals in the senior living industry. Ray has also provided education, training, and insight for senior living providers at all levels within a long-term care community. He has been a regular speaker at many national and state long-term care corporations and conventions.
I appreciate everybody coming together for this. We're going to spend some time talking about some emergency and disaster preparedness principles, but specifically tailored around dietary requirements. Now, the reality is that there's going to be some of what we talk about that's universal for everybody in the community, but will help you understand what your role is in participating in the processes as well for the new emergency and disaster preparedness requirements. This man, his name is Max Mayfield, he once stated, preparation through education is less costly than learning through tragedy. He's actually the director for the National Hurricane Center, and I think it's a good observation. Now, I tailored it a little bit, and I'm going to give you a picture of my older brother. And preparation through education is less costly than learning during a survey, because the reality is it's about saving your residents, it's about protecting your employees, but it's also about meeting the survey requirements. And we'll take a look at some of the outcomes. So how will it feel on the day of the emergency when you either have to shelter in place and provide meal service, and it's really called continuity of operations across the entire enterprise, or if you have to evacuate and still provide the meal services. You know, and sometimes it's as if that word miracle, at least in our minds, means something more than something we were able to accomplish. Somebody wants to lay claim to give credit to someone else. Well, and I'm always willing to accept that kind of help too. I am. But does the team have a role in bringing about that miracle as well? You think about that football team. How long did they practice? How many times did they go out running? How many times did they lift weights? How many times did they build the team effort that resulted in that miracle? Because that's really what we're talking about here. And if the day comes when you have to pull it off, your own kind of a miracle. I mean, I have a friend of mine down in Texas for one of the hurricanes that came in, and he, for 7 days, fed over 350 people 3 hot meals a day, completely isolated from all the services around him. And some people might want to say, wow, that's a miracle. But you and I both know that it takes a lot more than just thinking about it and giving it a name. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of a description of one dietary manager's morning. We're getting ready to serve lunch. I've been here since 6 a.m. this morning. Here's what I've done. Here's how I spent my morning. Attending morning stand-up meeting and a care plan meeting, checking inventory to prepare my food order, reviewing the menus with the 3rd new cook in less than 2 months, making calls to see if I can get somebody to come in for the lunch shift because my regular aide had to leave home early to pick up her sick child. And fortunately, that other aide was able to come in and help me. And then talking to the surveyor who was here to investigate a complaint. It's a busy morning, but in all of that, I've got to keep moving. Well, let's talk about some of those emergency preparedness principles that you're going to have to try to fit in, that you're going to have to try to make sure you've got your plan, your policies, your procedures, your training done. All right. So which is the new federal regulation? The small ball or the great big one? Because the reality is your emergency plan has been there for a while. And you've honed it, you've worked on it, you've polished it, you've practiced it. You've got a good, solid plan. The fact that they've brought a new rule to you, that really isn't going to change the requirements because you've been doing what they're asking you to do. It's just a different body now. Instead of being at a state level, now it's at a national level. CMS has published a regulation now. And the reality is, you're still going to have to respond and you're going to have to recover. So when we talk about a new regulation, what happens? Why do we end up with new regulations? And in your world, it's some of these kinds of images, whether it's a tornado, it's a hurricane, it's a flood, even something much, much smaller, like an elopement. So we end up with somebody taking the reins and creating a new rule or regulation, all driving towards, again, a successful response and recovery. When we think about emergency events, we have different ways of categorizing them. The first one is, how big is it? Is it a fire on a hallway? Is it the loss of the grid, the power grid, in your area, or is it community-wide? Maybe it's a severe winter storm, or a hurricane, or a flood. Another way of thinking about it is it going to happen right away? Or is it something that we have some warning for and we know that it's coming? And when we think about warning, I'd like to even pull up the concept that when we talk about a facility that's in Tornado Alley, that's warning too. You know when the seasons are, so you know that you've got to be ready for it. The immediate, that might be the fire in a trash can in a resident's room. And then a third way of thinking about it is, do we shelter in place to get through it, or do we evacuate? And there's all different kinds of images that we can pull together, that we can learn from, and good examples included. So, what kind of emergencies have you already prepared for? What are you thinking about? What do you have policies written for? Natural hazards? Now, the reality is there's lots of different kinds of hazards. You probably aren't subjected to each of those, but it's just like that tsunami. That's one we can take out of there, but maybe we would have to put something in. Maybe you've got a prison that's close to you, and so you'd have considerations there. Maybe you have a railroad spur that's been put in recently. Well, you've also got different kinds of technology hazards, whether it's nuclear power plants or a chemical plant or a freeway with different kinds of tanker trucks carrying different kinds of liquids and chemicals down the road. But then what about terrorism? Who on this webinar, when you started your career in long-term care, thought that the day would come when you had to worry about a terrorist or some sort of a terrorist attack? There's lots of different, besides these 6 different kinds of examples, but those are the kinds of things that you need to be prepared for too. Now, that's sort of the external kinds of exposures, but what about the internal considerations? What are your resident management systems? That's really related to the level of acuity of your residents, the kind of diagnoses that they have. And when you come down through it, as dietary, you're going to play a big role in that. A big role. I mean, hydration, nutrition, yes, dementia, yes, wound management, all those different kinds of examples, and maybe more than the 13 we have listed here. But dietary's role in each of these is significant. And the new regulation, again, continuity of operations, you need to be able to continue to provide your essential functions for your residents regardless of the conditions that you're faced with. And just a little sort of a mental image of this thing, because you get decisions to make, and you're not the only one involved in making those decisions. When we look at that first straight bar coming across, attaching to the circle, internal factors, scan down through those. Where are you going to? What kind of transportation do you have? What supplies do you have? I've actually added in the utilities, okay? But then your staffing, are staff going to go with you? Are staff going to bring their family? Because each of those things makes a big difference for your food planning too. And then, of course, resident acuity. And what does the community, the facility actually look like itself? So if those are internal factors, though, What about your external factors? Some of those you can change and some of those you can't. I mean, it's just like the storm zone. Compared to the flood zone, you may not have a possibility of a flood, but that storm zone could be a winter storm. But if it actually is a hurricane, then it matters too, because that flood, you have the surge that would come in. You have to run from surge. You can't batten down the hatches and survive that. So lots of ways of having to make decisions, but lots of people that are going to have to help you make those decisions as well too. And they may just flat make them for you. There was a day when, the administrator in the corporate office would decide when to evacuate, but now it could be the governor, it could be the mayor of the city, it could even be the president of the United States, depending upon the volume and the size of the emergency. So as you prepare for the concept of sheltering in place, 4 basic categories of preparation, okay? When you think about how are you going to cook, you're going to use natural gas, but you're going to need lights, you're going to need electricity, so you're going to have a backup plan for those kinds of things. On the utilities, very much related to the generator. If you don't lose power from the utilities, then the generator is not as big a deal for you. But when you scan down through there, my recommendation to you, especially on the utilities, is make this a pre-event consideration. Make sure that, you've got some holidays coming towards you, whether it's 4th of July or Memorial Day, and these are all events where you probably invite families and other people in, especially for a Thanksgiving dinner. Well, my recommendation to you is get a hold of your power company, find out who it is that's on the team that's going to decide when the grid goes down, which elements get energized first. Invite somebody. Bring them over. Let them get to know your residents. What happens when people meet your residents? They fall in love with them. The other office you might want to give a call to is your local emergency management district office. Invite some of those folks to come over and spend some time in your building. Invite them over for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. That'll all make a big difference in the time when the time comes that you need their help, because they'll already know your residents. They'll know about your residents. Fundamental basic supplies. You can scan down through that. Obviously food and water, but you've got to have power, your generator, linen storage. How do you get rid of all the waste? Imagine how quickly your dumpster is going to fill up if nobody's coming to pick it up. You've got to have a plan for how you're going to get rid of the waste and how you're going to store it until you can actually get it hauled off. And then there's the idea of security. We're so dependent on, in these moments where we have to shelter in place or we have to evacuate, we're so dependent on volunteers. Well, how do you know that person walking down the hallway is somebody that should actually be in the facility? And I just make a quick recommendation. I've been to scout camp about 14 different times. I've been a scoutmaster twice. And when you check in at a scout camp, because you've got a lot of young boys that are there, when you check in at that scout camp, they give you this band. And they come on sheets like 8.5 by 11. They take out their 3-ring binder that's full of these, and it's perforated, and they just tear it off. And everybody that's signed in and should be on campus, in the camp, has one of these on. And when you see somebody that doesn't, you don't tackle them and bring them down and handcuff them, but you know that you have to give notice to the authorities so that you can just confirm that they should be there and that they're not some sort of an interloper. Some of the traditional responsibilities that Dietary is used to, standard operating procedures, cooking, preparation, thawing out, storage, inventory, receiving, all of those kinds of things remain in place, and there needs to be an element in your plan, and you might even want to just call it food and nutrition, but your standard operating procedures established. And then there's a concept out there, it's called memorandums of understanding, or MOUs. And those are how you make arrangements with vendors and suppliers so that they know at the front end, before anything happens, what they're going to need to continue to provide to you. Water's going to be a big deal. There was one of the communities that I've worked with that actually had a memorandum of understanding with a water supplier. And whenever there was a declared or possibility of a declared emergency, that water supply would bring a 3,000 gallon tank of water and park it in the parking lot. And that's how they would flush the commodes, and they would have water, potable water that they could use. That was all part of their plan. What about hand washing and sanitizing? If you're on water restrictions, those are things that you need to build in and have supplies for. And then replenishment relationships with food vendors. But of course, you're going to have to store your food as well, too. You're going to have that emergency inventory there and rotation of the inventory. What about keeping your food chilled? What about having separate storage, refrigerated storage for both your foods and your medications? Because you still can't mix those even in an emergency situation. And you're going to want to make sure that you hone your inventory list, whether it's for supplies or it's for equipment. What is it that you're going to be able to, that you're going to want to take with you? Do you have it on campus at the time as an ongoing storage item? Also, what about the idea that if you have a sheltering in place situation, whether it's very hot or very cold, and you're on limited power supplies, you're going to need to be careful that you're able to provide your services even when you've got a lot of residents camped out in the dining room. And they're going to need to have access to bathrooms and to bathing and to washing areas. So that all needs to be built into your plan as well. And then what happens and what's in your plan for those off-shift times when dietary isn't staffed? You and I both know Murphy's Law tells you when will the emergency happen? When it's least convenient. So you're going to have to make sure that you've got plans so that whatever it is that needs to be gathered, that process gets started even before regular dietary staffing arrives at the facility. You're going to have recall lists, those kinds of capabilities. And then during the event, you've got to have a policy and procedure strategy so that you can make sure that hydration continues to be maintained for the residents and probably for volunteers and staff as well, too. Now, part of this is that a hazard determination process, and it's called a bunch of different things. Even the national standard doesn't have a specific name for it, but it's kind of an all-hazards vulnerability analysis. That's where you take a look, and you take a look at within the confines of the community of your facility. What about in your property line? What about the neighboring community around you? What are the hazards out there? And we've talked a little bit about them when we were talking about the different kinds of exposures and terrorism and things like that. But you've got to have a tool to do that, and we'll take a quick look at one. And it's not magical, and you won't be the one that's doing it, but you need to be aware of the fact that your exposures, the things you're concerned about, need to be on that vulnerability analysis as well. And what happens if you've got a secure memory care wing, there's a loss of power, and the magnetic locking system goes down? Are you going to be required to go assist nursing in taking care of some of those residents to ensure that they don't wander off? Or are there other exposures or other responsibilities you might have to carry? I mean, for instance, if indeed you do have to evacuate the community, you're going to have people gathering food and packing and all of those kinds of responsibilities, but you also may need to be helping with residents in wheelchairs to get them out to the shuttles and to get them onto the vans. You won't be lifting them, but there's other kinds of assistive responsibilities that you're going to need to identify. You're going to need to think about what are the immediate dangers. If it's a fire on a wing, your staff might have to run and go help evacuate residents off of the wing. If there is a fire, you're going to want to make sure that they know to turn off all the ventilators and air conditioners and fans and things like that. And then to isolate the fire itself, make sure that the doors and the windows are closed. Whenever we think about things that people ought to know about, does your staff understand how to turn off the gas, the electricity, and the water in the dietary department? Do they know where the valves are? Do they know where the wrenches are to turn those valves? You're going to need to realize that there's going to be times if you shelter in place that you're going to need to, somebody's going to need to seal off openings like air vents, fans, and those kinds of openings that might need to be dry air vents. That you're probably going to be the ones that have the tape and the food wrap, saran wrap. I didn't want to put that in there because that's a brand name, but it's a good way to think about it. Wax paper, aluminum foil, those kinds of supplies. And perhaps you don't have the tape, but you're probably going to be the first ones they come to for the wax paper and the saran wrap. And then what about botulism? Staff ought to be fully aware of botulism, the exposures, the signs. And if you have one person that is suspected to have botulism, then you're probably going to have others too, because it might be a thawing out process. It's sat on the counter for too long and at improper temperatures. Lots of those kinds of things that education needs to be done in advance of. Another area for education, and you're going to recognize these, it's the race principles, okay? Because if we follow race, we know what to do next. And we've kind of touched on some of this already. Race, rescue, those in the immediate danger. Then we sound the alarms and the alerts. We contain the fire as best we can, and that's by closing the doors and the windows. But then there's also the possibilities of extinguishment. Somebody might have to pull that fire extinguisher and put the flames out. So make sure that kind of training is done, but make sure that the policies exist also. And keep in mind, it's very seldom that it's the fire that actually kills. It's usually the smoke that kills. Here's a picture. Obviously, this is not a fire, but there's a flood. And you can see there's two sets of ramps, one on either side there, right in the middle of the picture. That's a freeway overpass. And the river has flooded. This is from back in 2009, but it caused the need to evacuate 130 residents out of a skilled nursing facility. And it was in Puyallup, Washington. We're going to take a look at some of the images and see some of the lessons that they learned. Okay, they had 99 wheelchair-bound residents, and they had lots of people. The county transit shuttles came in. And you'll see a picture of that too, because I think it's really interesting. Each shuttle carried 5 wheelchair-bound residents, and each one had an employee that went with them. 24 of the most acute residents actually had to be taken by ambulance. And there's the loading. That's what it looks like. You can see that long line, and it turns, and it continues. 5 in each one of those. That's going to be a lot of loading to get done. And when you think about it, they're not just going to be hauling people. They're going to haul items. You're going to need your food supplies. You're going to need oxygen concentrators. They're going to need mattresses. They're going to need all of those kinds of things. And there's times when we haven't thought about the need to have that box truck. This is a 22-footer. Actually, depending upon who you're renting from, you can actually get a 26 and or a 27-footer. And I'd get the biggest one possible because Dietary is going to have a lot that they need to be able to transport. And if you take a look at the order that this is done in, okay, the right-hand side, as you're looking down that hallway, are residents headed out to the shuttles. The left-hand side is kept open so that you can have other traffic, so that you have an organized process and it isn't just a melee and a massacre. Now, look out across that room image. Okay, that's an auditorium. You can see the basketball backboard and the hoop off in the distance a ways. And we're thinking, okay, so that's where they slept. Well, that's also where they ate. That's where they bathed. That's where they took their naps. That's where they passed their meds. So when you think about your plan, if you have to evacuate for delivering meals, you have to think out of the box. Okay, and if you've ever evacuated before, that's going to be valuable experience for reviewing your current policies and procedures and making sure that you're prepared, again, for that concept of continuity of operations. People have to eat. People have to get hydration. And this is still Linden Grove, and these are some of the things that they said. Even though we had minor shortfalls, the overall evacuation went extremely well. The mass evacuation of over 120 residents with disabilities, it's not an easy thing, not easy to think about. It's clearly not easy to do. Key factors were other people, the employees, the volunteers, emergency management offices, the transit companies, all of those things that all had to be done in advance of. Those relationships had to be established. Same as you with your replenishment supplies. So those are parts and pieces of your plan as well, too. And when you think about the word grateful, okay, because there was a great deal of gratitude expressed for all of the help that they got. I want to take you back to this image. This is of that tsunami in Japan. And I want to pick out a particular person, and you can see her bottom right-hand corner. All right, and I want to take that, and I want to put that side by side with what's going on. And the tsunami is one kind of a flood. This is a flood in North Dakota. They were going through their process of setting up to evacuate. And the face I want to focus on is that resident on the left-hand side. Because when you see the look on her face, and you see the look on the lady's face from that tsunami in Japan, you see concern, you see worry. But the difference is, with the resident in that nursing home, there is somebody standing there, and if we back up one more click, look at the personal contact that she's making. She's got her left hand reached out and gently cupping the resident's arm. And you might not be able to see it, but they're also holding hands. And they're also standing there looking eye to eye, and that staff member is talking in a very calm and prepared tone. She can help that resident calm down, help that resident make the decision she needs to make, mentor her a little bit, and encourage her. What a big difference between those two. And there was actually Ann Morrow Lindbergh, and this happened many, many years ago. In fact, it was early 1900s, first decade of the 1900s. Ann Morrow Lindbergh and her husband had their son that was kidnapped. And she said this afterwards: "My life cannot implement in action the demands of all the people to whom my heart responds." Think about that. When you get yourself into a situation where you're having to evacuate or shelter in place, your heartstrings are going to be tugged on a regular basis, okay? And Neely Maxwell said about Ann's quote, obviously decades later, "That's good counsel for all of us, not as an excuse to forego duty, but as a sage point about pace and the need for quality in relationships." That, for me, is another one of those pre-event kinds of ideas. The fact that those relationships have to be established. That relationship between that staff member and that resident didn't suddenly happen on the day of need, much as your relationship with your dietary department staff and their relationship with the residents as well. Mike Laffron, who's a risk manager for consulate management, made this statement: "Finding ways to relieve the anxiety of the situation for the residents and staff is something that we probably don't address as much as we should." When this happens, you're going to find staff members that become very, 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 very worried, very concerned. They've got loved ones that are not there at the community. They're worried about their own children. All of those kinds of things, and you're going to need to think through some of that as well. Now, when we think about the regulations, though, they aren't going to give thought to relationships. But here's what some of the regulations are going to require you to do. All right? There's 6 components that they've identified. Those 6. The assessment process, we talked about that all-hazard risk assessment, your policies and procedures. A communications plan, not just a recall plan, but what are you going to say to who when, including the press, the emergency management offices, all of those kinds of groups. Now, you're not going to have to do that, but it's part of your plan. Training and testing. You're going to have specific roles for training and testing. Then your power, your generators, and working with the groups around you. They've identified these 4 as the core elements. Okay? And then in my own thought processes, I went through and I've identified those 3. What's in your plan, the policies and procedures that you need, and then your training and testing. Those are the kinds of pieces that you're going to need to make sure that you have well documented and well trained for in your emergency preparedness program. Now, I've mentioned continuity of operations. The requirement does not state that you have to have a recovery plan. What they do say is a continuity of operations plan. And so we've talked about it. I continue to mention it to you because it's really important. You need to decide that, well, here's the reality. If you're going to evacuate away from the facility, away from the community, you're going to have to evacuate to come back to it. So you're going to need to make sure that all your food preparation, your hydration, all those kinds of things are planned for, including during transit. And whenever the feds say the facility can choose, it usually means that they're going to bust your chops if you don't have it in place. So make sure that you are covering your side of that continuity of operations. In terms of written comprehensive emergency plan, you've got to develop it, okay, based on all the hazards you're exposed to. It needs to be a comprehensive, integrated approach. You need to identify and document your hazards. Now, this is specifically the specifics of the requirement, okay? You need to develop your capacities and your capabilities, your capacity for storage, your capacity for disposal, your capabilities of providing food even when you're not staffed or you're not in the same kind of a location that you naturally are used to. You need to be ready for all different kinds of emergencies, and you can scan through that, whether it's care-related, loss of power, communications. You aren't going to get the replenishments that you're used to getting, and what part of the facility are you going to lose? Now, when you think about the policies and procedure requirements, they actually have 11, okay? And now I've identified those 3 as specifically containing things that you need, as the dietary department, need to be able to make sure you have. Let's talk about subsistence needs for just a moment. And that's food, water, pharmacy, sources of energy. All of those kinds of things are subsistence needs. It's not the swimming pool is heated. It's none of those kinds of needs. These are life-saving, life-sustaining needs. You're going to have to make sure that you can provide a temperature that's reasonable, whether it's not too hot, not too cold. You're going to need to make sure that you've got sources of lighting. And even when electricity goes down, you've got to have fire detection. So that's probably going to mean people are going to be standing fire watches. And then sewage and waste disposal. I mentioned that. How quickly is your dumpster going to fill up if nobody's coming to empty it out for you? You're going to have to make sure you get plenty of heavy plastic bags and a storage area for it. And you need to make sure that you can do all of those things, whether you evacuate or you shelter in place. I'm just going to scan through these bullets. We've kind of talked about those already. And keeping in mind that you don't have to heat or cool the entire community. So they're probably going to want to cluster residents. Just as you saw them in the gymnasium and at school, you might find yourself having to deliver meals when you've actually got residents and staff almost living in the dietary space. When we talk about testing and training, you got to be able to show that you're doing your drills, you're doing your orientation, and it's not just for your regular staff, but it's for volunteers and for contractors. You got to make sure that you review your plan, ALA, at least annually, that you document all of your training, that you've documented your policies and procedures, and that your staff can actually not just spew words back, but they can demonstrate their knowledge and their skills. You're going to find yourself being required to participate in more facility-based or community-based exercises on a larger scale in conjunction with the local hospital and things like that. But then you want to back up. Even if it's a fire drill, you want to back up and you want to see what you learned from it. Make sure that you revise your plan accordingly. Things to think about, make sure that you've got enough flexibility in your plan, and you've got your resources so that you're training the things that need to be trained annually. And that abbreviation you see there, ARA, After Action Report, it's the best way to document the lessons that you've learned, and then you keep that with your records, and during survey you can show your process for learning from your experiences. Now, when you think about this training, it isn't that your dietary staff can go out and give care, that they can, repair the air conditioners or any of those kinds of things. It's specific to their responsibilities and their duties during the emergency. All right, let's change topics a little bit. Let's go on to see what we've learned from our peers, and let's take a look at some data too. All of the information I'm going to share with you right now comes from Nursing Home Compare, and it's on Medicare.gov. Now, when you take a look at that second column, that's the total count of citations that have been given first 6 months of the year nationwide for that particular tag. The tag numbers are that third column. This tag, the 460 citations, were for emergency preparedness testing and training, actually conducting the testing and the exercises. That's the one that people got hit the most. And if you see the yellow, the three yellow ones, those are the testing and training requirements. So quite a few fell into that range. In fact, if you look at the little matrix to the right-hand side, of the 1,875 tags given in total for all of the, or citations given for all of the tags, the 4,584 tags, because 1,875 of them were for policies and procedures. Your testing and training had an awful lot of tags, too, for just a few citations for the number of tags that are there. So when we're starting to think about where do we focus our training and our follow-up for 2019, you can see those areas. And policies and procedures, make sure you've got them in place. Your testing and your training, make sure that it's done. Okay? Make sure that you've got it in orientation and that you've got your annual retrainings as well and participation in the drills. When it comes down to trying to predict what to expect for 2019, I'll just share a quote with you. This is from a fire marshal. We're going easy with scope and severity this year. Next year, we'll be issuing IJs. And so in terms of, what you're going to do, how you're going to figure out where to get started for improving for 2019, go take a look at the experiences that we've had so far for the first 6 months. There's a lot of area for each of us to work in, okay? Now let's take a look at some of the things that our peers are telling us. This is actually some comments from the Linden Grove community, okay? The statement was deployable assets came from inventory stock. Now, deployable assets, they had to evacuate, so the food products they had to take with them, their utensils, their means of cooking, that had to come from inventory. They had no time, they had no ability to go buy new things. Plus, they had to be able to transport it. We've talked some about that transport too. Go get a big truck. Have that as an agreement, memorandum of understanding with the local truck rental agency. Procure bins. I mean, you can only put so many things in trash bags, okay? And they don't stack, and they don't protect, and they get crushed. So make sure that you've got empty bins for your packing. And then you want to make sure that you have a honed, accurate, updated master checklist, not just for the food, but for the equipment that you're going to need as you prepare to evacuate. The idea that you're going to be surveyed on these, your staff is going to have to be able to answer some questions. They almost have to be able to share the journey that you've taken, okay? We realize that it's a new standard, but it's not just new for the staff, it's new for the surveyors too. And when we get into trouble is with the surveyors, when somebody, whether it's hopefully not you, but it might be a staff member, they can't answer the surveyor's question. They don't know what the answer is to it. So make sure that we're talking to them about those kinds of things, the critical pieces that go on in dietary that they have to be able to perform. Make sure that they know where a copy of the plan and the policies and the emergency plan and the policies and procedures are. Make sure that they know where the policy, what policies apply to them. And then when we talk about testing and training, some of your testing and training ought to be to familiarize your staff with the journey that you've taken, with the steps that the changes that you've made. And quite honestly, do it with a little bit of excitement and reward too. I mean, if you go through once a week and you have a series of questions that you test them on, and they get an answer right, give them a Snickers bar. They're cheap, they're inexpensive. You can go get those bite-sized ones. When we think about how the survey is going to progress, your surveyors are trained to do these 6 things, okay? And we're going to fill it in a little bit. Asked to review what? Well, the plan itself. Where are they stored? Staff ought to know that. They're going to ask to see evidence of different kinds of things. Your fire drills, your emergency power, your after-action reports. They're going to ask the staff to demonstrate. A question might even come up. We mentioned this earlier. The idea that what happens if you lose power? What are you going to do? What are your roles for the memory care wing? Are there responsibilities you have to go and assist? Make sure that your families and your residents have knowledge of this too. And you can actually put together a 1-page guideline because your residents need to be educated. There's specific requirements in the policies and the procedures that detail what the residents need to be trained on, what the families need to be told. And then what changes have you made? Well, we've had the Sheriff's Department come in. We've talked to the Fire Department. We now have staff members that participate in actually providing the fire drill. Some of those kinds of examples, and those would be good things to be doing, by the way, as well. And when we talk about communications plan, that's really going to talk to the management team. It's going to talk probably to the folks who are on this phone. What's in your management, your communications plan? Who do you need to be telling what about? And you say, I don't know. Well, it's in your plan, and you probably need to go back and start finding out, talk to the administrator. Maybe in your stand-up meeting, you cover a little bit of that sort of information too. Okay? A little bit about surveyors. You're getting all different kinds of perspectives from surveyors. In fact, we have some different surveyors doing. We've got some fire marshals. We've got regular surveyors. We've got life safety code coming in some states. It really depends on the state. And some of them come in more to teach. Others are still in the old style just to enforce. A Kansas surveyor was upset because the hazard vulnerability analysis, he said it needed to be more specific. It actually contained references to a hurricane. It was just one of the things that they asked about on this. Well, they had rated it as 0 possibility of happening, but the surveyors still, they're learning. They're learning what matters most, okay? They hadn't gone down the path yet of realizing that, okay, the 0 means it's no risk, it's not a problem here. So that hazard vulnerability analysis tool was still a good tool. And they're trained, and you can see this is actually Module 2, Lesson 1, and this is the training that surveyors have received. When they walk in, they'll ask for a copy of the plan itself. Of leaders, they're going to ask for a couple of things. Tell us what kind of hazards you've prepared for. And you can think about that. You don't have to talk about evacuating to here and evacuating to there. You have a plan if we have to evacuate, if we have to shelter in place. A single plan would cover multiple areas that you've evacuated to. And then, does your plan have the policies and the procedures? Does it have the required elements? And then make sure that the annual reviews are done. Another piece from the training that they receive, again, pointing at the leaders, they're going to ask you to describe what kind of limitations do you have in your residence, what kind of diagnoses do you have, and with your situation, it would be specialized diets. Okay? Strategies in place to address those needs. How are you going to manage the specialized diets? How are you going to do it during whatever the emergency is? Now, this is kind of a special question for you too, because succession plans are one of those required pieces. as you go from shift to shift, and you might be working 12-hour shifts too, or even longer than that in some situations. What's your succession plan? How do you hand off responsibilities whenever there is a shift change to make sure that nothing gets dropped? All right, let's talk about making the miracle happen. We looked at this, okay? And I don't know what you thought about football. I'm not really a football enthusiast, but I love to watch people who perform their job really well. And that's what we saw here. So my question to you is, how good do you want your team to be? Okay? Because it's not really how good does the team want to be. It's how good do you want them to be? And what are you willing to do to help them? Well, I want you to watch this little video, and then we'll talk briefly about it, okay? Now, if I were to ask you how long it took for those 4 tires to be changed, I would also tell you that it was a world record at the time. It was 3.4 seconds. There's a new world record, but I don't like the video nearly as well. And they cut it down to 1.92 seconds. And when you think about cutting that, that performance almost in half, it's kind of hard to imagine. But how did they get good? And how will your team get good? Okay, how will you help them? I mean, if we were in a live room and we were face-to-face, you'd be calling out things like teamwork, equipment, training, mentoring. Everybody understood what their job was, and they practiced it, and they got good at it, and they worked as a team. The reality is, that's kind of your process in making this miracle happen. And I'll tell you, once you get through an evacuation or a sheltering in place, you're going to look back and you're going to see many miracles that happen all around you. And it will be your staff. They are your heroes. They are the ones that help make this happen, okay? So those are the things we've talked about, and I thank you for attending.
And now, for anyone interested in learning more about new trends in food service equipment, please welcome Tina Burns, Direct Supply's food service product consultant.
Hello. Thank you so much for sticking around and joining me. My name is Tina Burns, and I'm here to talk about some different trends in the food service arena. So with the first slide, if the product on this slide looks familiar, it's because Subway and Starbucks both use a version of this type of rapid cook oven. So if you've ever had a sub at Starbucks or at Subway, you've probably seen one of these units before. Rapid cook ovens are also known as accelerated cooking ovens, and they're ideal for cooking food to order. They're most commonly used in bistros, cafe, and room service operations. And these units come in a variety of different sizes. The benefit of a rapid cook oven is that they reduce cook times, optimize space, and increase productivity. Best of all, no hood is needed. So to give you an idea of cook times, you could toast a sub in 20 seconds, bake chocolate chip cookies in 1 minute and 30 seconds, or roast an individual chicken breast in 6 minutes. For those of you with rehab units, I'm sure that you found that a resident in for a hip replacement might not want to eat the food being served. So maybe instead of baked chicken breast, green beans, and mashed potatoes, they'd rather eat a cheeseburger or a personal pizza. And maybe instead of eating with the general skilled nursing population, they prefer to eat in their room. This product offers a solution because you're able to cook meals at the same quality throughout the day and the evening. The units are simple to use and deliver restaurant quality results. Another interesting option when we're talking about ventless units is the AltoSham multi-cook oven. So Like the rapid cook ovens, the multi-cook oven has a small footprint, is easily programmable, and most importantly, it's ventless. What makes this different is that it can cook at different temperatures in each chamber. So these units come with the option of 2, 3, or 4 chambers. And with the chambers, you can cook multiple products at the same time with no flavor transfer. The only caveat is there can't be more than 100-degree difference between the chambers. So if you have a 4-chamber unit, you could have cookies in one chamber baking, a vegetable roasting in another, potatoes in another, and a protein, all cooking at the same time without any sort of flavor transfer. And the max temperature for this unit is 525 degrees. Next, I'd like to talk about portable hood options. All right. So portable hoods are great for cafes, bistros, and display cooking. The Equipex portable ventless hood gives the ability to do display cooking in areas without a fixed hood. There are 2 different versions of this unit. The unit shown is great for toasters, panini grills, and griddles. And there's another unit that's set up for pizza ovens, microwave ovens, and small countertop convection ovens. Both units operate using a standard 120-volt plug and have a platform that will hold up to 150 pounds in equipment. The filtering system on the Equipex unit consists of 3 different filters: a washable grease filter, a disposable particulate filter, and a disposable activated charcoal smoke filter. Like a standard hood, the units come with a grease trough. The units are primarily designed for type 2 cooking, which is cooking that creates heat and steam. But if you're interested in doing type 1 cooking, the most common thing that comes to mind are proteins, bacon, let's say, and other products that create grease-laden fumes. There is an option to add Ansel ports. The last product that I'd like to talk about today is the Suzy Q cart. So the Suzy Q cart system offers a unique solution for tableside dining. If you haven't seen this before, this cart was created by Suzanne Queering, who is a registered dietitian. The Suzy Q cart is fully insulated and is made to be plugged in the kitchen prior to service. Once you're ready to serve the meal, the cart is unplugged and will hold temperature for right around 40 minutes as it moves throughout the dining room. What you'll notice is that the cart is at table height. This is important because it gives residents the ability to see and smell the food prior to making their selections. The staff member rolls the cart to the table and offers the selections to the residents. Due to the personal nature of how food is served, residents experience direct contact with the dietary staff, which not only increases engagement, but allows for immediate feedback on acceptance of the food. The dining staff is engaging with the resident at a much higher level than if they were placing the food on a tray in front of them. Because the resident has an opportunity to choose what they would like to eat, they will eat more, which actually reduces the need for supplements. Think of all the times that you've brought a tray to the table and the resident doesn't want what they selected because someone next to them has something that looks much better. Trust me, food envy is real. Or maybe they just forgot what they put on their meal card. As an operator, the Suzy Q cart system decreases food waste because the resident is only taking the food that they would like to eat. The standard Suzy Q cart shown serves 20 to 40 residents. And the mini Suzy Q cart, which is shown in the upper right-hand corner, serves up to 20 residents. The most important thing about this cart is the level of training support. Suzanne Queering is very engaged in the training process. So in addition to the training manual and webinar, she is available via email and phone support to help ensure smooth implementation.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you all for attending today. If you have any questions about the products presented, please contact us at webinars@directsupply.com. Or for more information about upcoming webinars, please visit directsupply.com/webinars. Thank you once again.